You mentioned very briefly the Offshore Magazine, which is the club's journal.
Yeah.
And you were very instrumental in the early days of that magazine, working with the editor David Culfell.
Yep.
And I think you're on the publications committee for a long time here, producing this magazine, you know, voluntary magazine.
Yep.
That was a great success story, wasn't it, that Offshore Magazine?
Yeah. Yeah. Historically, it goes back, particularly for the record here, it goes back earlier than Culfell. It started in, I think, about 1971. I was overseas at the time and came back and had an article in the second or third issue. I wrote an article when I was working in London, and so when I got back to Australia, the then editor Tommy Thompson, who'd actually, I understand, had set up the Women's Day or Women's Weekly, is a very prominent editor. And yachtsman here, he'd set it up with a committee of really good. Rob McCauley's still around. I think Bob Ross is still around, both in media, and just about everyone involved was top shelf media person. And I came in on this a year into it, or third issue into it. Later on, Tommy did a few issues, and then later on, David. We had an interim editor, a fellow called Dan Stovanevic, if I got the name right, who had to go off to Melbourne on business, and then Culfell took over for quite a number of issues. You know, you'd have to look at it, but he did 50 of the 90 issues. I can't remember the figures as I sit here, but I was in from about issue number 3 or 4 to the end, when it ended up in a palace revolt. We got kicked out. Yeah. By the board at the time. It
was a labour of love, wasn't it? I mean, it's a magazine that everyone, as a member, looked forward to getting, receiving on a, I think, monthly basis, or was it every 2 months?
No, I think it was bi-monthly. Yeah, you're right.
Yeah, but it was a real good meaty club journal.
Yeah. Well, I think that goes back to Tommy being highly qualified in the first place. So it kicked off not as an amateur thing. It was within its limited resources of not so many sheets, but it was first class to start off with, and they had a first class team to go on, so that just led into all first class. When I finally did a list for the last issue, I might have, hopefully it was up to 30, 40, 50 names, and most of them were involved in the media one way or another, and still prominently so. As I say, Bob Ross is still doing editorial work. We had can't quickly remember his name. He left us and went down as a sub-editor on the Mercury in Hobart for many years. Mike Power, thanks. He'd at that time been an editor of something like Modern Boating. We've got Sandy Schofield still around. He's in advertising. Were you involved at all?
Yeah.
Well, so
you not only did Offshore, you did the Sydney Hobart Race program, which was a really great document. It had every yacht, every crew member, all the historical data.
That's right. Yeah, well, we felt confident of ourselves with the Offshore up until 75, so I might have joined at about 72 now that I think about it. And by 75 we felt confident that we'd take on the Sydney Hobart program ourselves in-house. And again, with the competent blokes we put, and David as a competent editor, we put the Sydney Hobart Race program together, which he did as editor, and I was the chairman by that time. I joined the board. I was on board from 75 to 86, so I was chairman of that committee. So we did about 11 issues of the Sydney Hobart program, and because of the competence, we're hardcore yachtsmen. We weren't just journalists working for a yachting magazine, slightly different. We really put a lot of thought into it, and even today, I think in many respects, those 11 issues we did finishing in 86, were even today better. I think the last issue I saw of the program was pretty good, but I think we had some crummy ones filled with reviews on how to, on the latest catamaran and motorboat reviews and whatnot. We wouldn't tolerate anything. It was really very much concentrated on the Hobart race. Yeah.
Well, for all your hard work with the publications and on the board, you were awarded life membership at the club in 2005.
Yep.
Which was a great recognition of the effort that you put in to the club.
Yeah.
And I think to be nominated by your peers and selected by your peers would be a great thrill for you.
Yeah. One aspect when you mentioned that just triggered that thought. I was glad that I didn't know anything about it, and I was recommended by Bob Renack, who's an acquaintance of mine, but no great mate of mine. So I was very pleased that my best mate, let's say Dawson, didn't write a glowing article, and some of these things become a little bit incestuous. But Bob, as a former was he a general sailing manager?
Yes,
yeah. So he'd sort of obviously seen some of me at work over time, and I was very pleased that he put that up. So I felt very, if it was going to happen, I'm glad an outsider, if you like, did it. Yeah.
So this year, 2011, you're going to Hobart again. It'll
Yeah.
be 50 years since you did your first race.
Yep.
Let's look at the boats over that
Yeah.
period, not necessarily the ones you've sailed on, but
Yeah.
the ones you've raced against or even
Yeah.
sailed on.
Yeah.
What could you say is probably one of the best boats, all-round boats, that you've seen or sailed on in those 50 years?
Oh, well,
I mean, it's a very general question, I know, it's a hard question.
Oh, well, I suppose we'd have to, probably because we mentioned it earlier, but I'd have to probably think of Sovereign. We've got the double. No matter how humble you are in whatever boat, you're still trying to do well against either your rivals or within your handicap division, or even trying to win the thing. So, you know, it was good winning it. I remember when I sailed on Fare Thee Well, that was owned by a fellow named Russ Williams, and we did two Hobart, well, I actually did 3 Hobart races on, 2 under him and another one under later owner Jimmy Easton. So I'm the only guy that did all 3 on that hull. But I went to a cocktail party at Russ's place just prior to the first Hobart, and I saw his medallion. He'd won the Hobart race in Tirana in 1959. I thought, oh gee, it'd be good to win one of those. So I'm very pleased I've got one of those from Sovereign. I'd have to think twice about any other sort of classic interesting boats that I've been on. I can run through the list, and there are some interesting ones, but look, for example, I can think of Apollo. I did 2 races on Apollo, which was a bit of a glamour in those days, but you couldn't think it was a particularly nice boat, because I used to sleep in the quarter berth, and I
said, down below.
That's right. I said to one journalist, and I got quoted, you know, it was like sleeping in a rainforest. You know, you know, so it had no grace to it, but it was a beautiful boat, sailed very well. Very fast.
You mentioned Apollo, owned by Jack Rookland.
Jack Rookland,
I mean, talk about characters.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a character, and you write a book on Jack.
Yeah.
Probably some have. But
yeah. Well, I'm able to reveal it now, because I did everything. Actually, Sid, I wouldn't tell anyone else except it was this historic interview, but Sid Brown, who's one of the best seamen that's ever been on the Hobart race, I sailed, I think, 2 Hobart races on Apollo with him, and in our field, you might know yourself, people don't get any accolades at all. No one actually comes up to you and says, gee, you were fantastic on that race, Tony, or Peter, you know, you hear about it later, if you do, but it's not a sport where they'll shake a hand and congratulate. But Sid sort of might have told the bloke standing next to me, he said, oh, I'm very happy with Tony, he does, and I said, why? That's Sonny Cable, why are you happy with him? He said, oh, he does everything on a boat, and the young blokes probably today don't do that. So I've done a lot of time as a foreign hand. I was doing steering then, which was terrific, and I was doing all the cooking, which I'm leading up to this with Jack Rookland, and I was doing everything, but that was normal in the early days. The hands were very well trained in seamanship. I think that word seamanship doesn't necessarily apply today. They probably don't even know what it means, but all us young guys, my generation, the class of 61 if you like, we're all being trained up as seamen with these fabulous old boys. We should go back to the messengers and whatnot too in the interview. But yeah, Sid said, you know, Tony's a very good hand, and they said, why? Because he does everything. Now, so I was doing a lot of the cooking also on that particular voyage, and I know for a fact that Jack, who suffered from seasickness, I could tell that he basically did nothing on that race. He's got all the kudos as the owner, and you know, first across, whatever, we were 5th across the line or something, but he basically didn't come on deck the whole work, because I had to feed him, occasionally give him sort of warm custard or whatever. But so yeah, so there's the famous Jack Rookland, famous owner, but I knew for a fact, because I was around all the time, 12, 16 hours a day, that he didn't come out of his bunk.
Because Apollo had at one stage a boat nigger, as we call him in those days, called Tommy Sharples.
Yeah, yeah.
And Tommy was allergic to varnish.
Yeah. So
that was a good person to have as a boat nigger. When he did the varnishing, he wasn't around. But I mean, there's another character, Tommy Sharples. But you spoke about Boy Messenger.
Yeah.
I mean, Boy, I think, sailed in the first Sydney Hobart race.
He did.
And he was a very dear friend of many of the people here at CYCA.
Yeah, he later became a life member, as you say, because of it. Yeah. Yeah.
But he was a great seaman. I mean, I did my first ever ocean race with Boy.
Yeah.
It was a deep freeze race in mid-June. We talk about we used to race regularly.
That's right.
Queen's birthday weekend in June, we used to race up to Bird Island, and the first time we ever went out the heads under sail was with Boy, and he steered the whole way up there and back. It's lovely gar. But you tell us some stories about Boy.
Well,
a terrific scene.
Well, my connection with Boy was, as I mentioned earlier in the interview, that this boat, Tarney, was sold by Boy as a broker who had the marina over in Double Bay, and so he took Jeff, my skipper, and me and the crew out on our first Hobart races too. So the first Hobart race I'd have gone with Boy also. So I did a few Hobart races. I'm saying Hobart race. I'm saying local race, ocean races. I meant to say. So so you know, whether it be Bird Island or wherever. So my early racing was with Boy, and Boy, as you have intimated, he was a great mentor to a lot of young people, including yourself, as you say. So I became one of his works team. He used to have a works team of 18-footer blokes, really hard cases, and he used to needed a cabin boy. So I was the works team of these famous 18-footer blokes like Cliffy Monkhouse, world champion, and all of it. And I used to go along as cabin boy. So I did a lot more sailing with Boy than just sailing on Tarney. And what did a cabin boy do? Anything they wanted when they say, "Here, boy." I think I was probably number 3 on the foredeck because I couldn't be number 1 or number 2. But yeah, no, I learned all the seamanship and sailed with these characters. For example, there was a famous sailor named Jim McCloy who I only learnt later. He'd done a number of Hobart races. A wonderful fella. I learnt later he'd won a military cross on the Kokoda Trail, the same as a fellow on the first offshore group. His wife's now a journalist, Basil Caterns. Basil also won a VC on Kokoda. They're both in the 1st Battalion. There were about the first 1,000 blokes to sign up in the first, and I had a connection with both of them. Basil's wife was Angela Caterns on the ABC. But Jim was an old-time military bloke, very sound citizen, good sailor, but I later sailed with blokes like the Jackie North and Peter Cosgrave and of course Mickleborough and all of the old-time seamen. With the first generation, I classified as the first generation of seamen. Blokes like Sidey and Hammond and the group which I've interviewed, they came on the mid-50s. I reckon they're the second generation, and I probably came on somewhat after that with as I say, the class of 61, the likes of the famous Nookie Bennetts and other luminaries like that. Yeah. But, what was the question?
Of course, I forget. No, we're talking about Boy Messenger and seamanship.
Yeah. So I used to go out on various boats, and so what I was also doing, I was so keen that if our boat wasn't going out for some reason, I'd get a ride on another boat, and I must have gone on quite a number of boats. There was Kintail, which was one that had an old famous Asian race. I went out with Boy on that, 200 miles and one through another. So, there was one called something like Sylvets. I can't quick. Doctor. A squadron boat. Sylvina. Sylvina. We had an old clunker. Jolly Roger went and did a race on that. Probably did 10 or 15 races. Oh, there was one time Boy took me out as a cabin boy on the original Carmen. The Carmen class were famous at their time, as you'll remember, one of which Cadence won the Hobart race in '66. And we all went off to Bird Island, the aforesaid Bird Island one night, and blow me down, we all came first, second and third, you know, but they only had a crew of 4, so, you know, I did a lot of sailing with Boy, including something like that. We didn't come first, we're the one that came third.
Well, Tony, thank you for your time, and good luck in your 46 Sydney Hobart races.
Thanks very much. Thanks, Peter.